Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. If this is your first time here, this is the channel where men who came out to these islands looking for something, love, a fresh start, a retirement they could actually afford, tell you exactly what happened to them, in their own words, so you don't have to find out the hard way. Tonight's man is Garth, 55 years old, from Alberta, Canada. Small town outside Red Deer originally, then Fort McMurray, then wherever the rig was. 26 years in the oil patch. Derrick hand first, driller later. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, for most of his adult life. He'll tell you himself that he spent all those years believing one thing about himself above everything else, that he was nobody's fool. He was wrong about that before he ever set foot in this country. That part he'll explain. What we'll say is this. Garth's story is not the one you're expecting. There's no bar girl in it. There's no woman who vanished with his money and blocked his number. The woman in this story had a real job, a real badge, a real family, and as far as we can tell, real feelings for him. That's what makes this one worth your 90 minutes. By the time it was over, there was a house standing in a provincial town on the west coast of Cebu Island. Roof on, no windows, and Garth was standing in front of it doing arithmetic he'd been avoiding for about a year. We'll let him take it from there. This one's going to stick with you, particularly if you've ever thought about building something out here. Quick note before we start. After hearing so many of these stories on this channel, we put together a guide covering what we've learned from them, the questions to ask, the paperwork to check, the things guys wish they'd known. It's linked in the description if you want it. That's it. That's the whole ad. All right. Here's Garth's story, in his own words. I'll start with the part everybody skips, which is the money. Because if you don't understand what happened to me in Alberta, you won't understand why I did what I did out here. 26 years on the rigs. You want to know what that's like? It's this. You're gone for 14 days. You come home for 14 days. And you do that until your body quits. Winter drilling in northern Alberta. Minus 38 with the wind. Hands so cold you can't feel the tongs. I lost a fingernail on the number 2 well outside Fox Creek and didn't notice for 4 hours. That's not a brag. That's just what the job was, but it paid. That's the thing people forget when they talk about the patch like it's some sort of punishment. It paid, and I wasn't stupid with it. I didn't buy the truck with the lift kit. I didn't do the sled, the quad, the boat, the whole Fort Mac starter kit. I put money away. 26 years of putting money away. And then a guy I'd worked with for 9 winters put me into a private company. Oilfield services outfit. Private placement. Guaranteed return. I'm not going to say his name because his kids are still around and this isn't about them, but I want to be clear about something. He wasn't a con man. He believed it too. He put his own in. That's what got me. If a stranger had pitched me, I'd have laughed at him. It was Wayne. I'd shared a doghouse with Wayne. I'd seen the man cry about his dog. There was a binder. I remember that specifically. A binder with tabs and a signature page, with those little arrow stickers showing you where to sign. It looked official enough. 11 months. That's how long it took. First there were updates. Then there were fewer updates. Then there was a letter. And that was it. No court case. No trial. Nobody in handcuffs. Just a number on a screen that used to be a life and then wasn't. You know what the worst part was? There was nobody to hit. I'm a big guy. I spent my whole working life around men who solved things with a pipe wrench and stubbornness, and there was nothing in this I could put my hands on. I actually drove out to Wayne's place, sat in the driveway, didn't even get out of the truck. What was I going to do? Hurt a 60-year-old man with a bad heart who'd lost his own money too? So I backed out and drove home. And that was my big confrontation. Left me with about $26,000 and the pension. Which, before anybody in the comments does the math for me, the pension's real. OAS and CPP, roughly $2,000 a month Canadian once it all kicked in. That's not nothing. In Alberta, it's not much of anything, mind you. Rent alone was eating over half of it. But here's what actually broke me, and it took me about a year to understand this. It wasn't the money. It was that I'd been sure. My whole life, the one thing I had was that I could read a situation. On a rig, you learn to feel things before you see them. Pressure change, a hum in the drawworks that's a quarter tone off, mud coming back heavier than it went down. Guys used to come get me because I could hear when something was wrong. That was my thing. That was the whole personality. And I signed a binder because a friend showed me tabs. So after that, I didn't trust myself. Not about anything. I'd stand in the Canadian Tire trying to pick a snow shovel, and I'd have to leave. That sounds like a joke, and it isn't. That winter, I was in a rented place east of Red Deer. Little bungalow, oil-stained driveway, a yard that wasn't mine. My sister called every Sunday, and I got good at sounding fine. 54 years old, no rotation, no crew, no truck to warm up at 4 in the morning. You don't realize how much of you is just the schedule until they take the schedule. Sat there in January watching the driveway drift over. Minus 31. The furnace running the way a furnace runs when it's losing. And I started watching those videos. You know the ones. Guy on a balcony somewhere warm, talking about how he lives on $1,200 a month, and here's his ocean view. The boys pushed Thailand. Everybody pushes Thailand. And I looked at it. I did. But I kept coming back to the Philippines for one reason, and it's not romantic. It's not the beaches. It's this. They speak English. After Wayne, the idea of getting done again in a language I couldn't hear coming, I couldn't. I genuinely couldn't. I needed to be somewhere I'd at least catch it. That was my whole risk assessment. That was the extent of my due diligence. English. I know how that sounds now. Anyway. February, 6:20 in the morning. Still dark out. I made a profile on one of those sites. Didn't put a photo up for 2 days. Wrote about 4 sentences about myself, and half of them were about the weather. I wasn't looking for a wife. I want that on the record. I was looking for something on the screen that wasn't the forecast, so the profile went up on a Tuesday in February, and by Thursday I had 91 messages. 91. I'm 54 years old at this point. I've got a face like a boot. And I had put up exactly 1 photo of myself standing beside a rig mat in a Carhartt. 91 messages. Now, I want to be clear that I wasn't flattered. I've told people that since, and they don't believe me, but it's true. 91 messages tells you something, and what it tells you isn't that you're handsome. I sat there with my coffee going cold, and I thought, okay, so this is a fishery, and I'm the fish. Most of them were the same 3 messages, with different names on top. Hi, honey. Good morning. God bless you, sir. I am looking for serious man, not player. You could line them up side by side and see the template underneath. Same way you can see a bad weld under a coat of paint if you know what you're looking at. And a good chunk of them, 4 or 5 exchanges in, would want load. That's phone credit. 200 pesos, 300. Which is like $5 or $6 Canadian. Nothing. But that's the test, see? They're not fishing for the $6. They're checking whether the tap turns. I didn't send anybody load. Not one. I want to put that on the record because of everything that comes after. For about a year, I was probably the most suspicious man on that entire website. I'd deliberately contradict myself in messages to see if they noticed. I'd say I worked in mining one week and oil the next, and see if anybody flinched. Nobody ever flinched. They didn't read close enough to flinch. After Wayne, I'd sort of turned into that, a guy checking for leaks everywhere except the one place the leak actually was. Maravich messaged me in the middle of March about the snow. That was it. That was the whole opening. I had a photo up of my driveway east of Red Deer, taken at like 7 in the morning, and the drifts had come up over the bottom of the fence rails, so it was just this white nothing with a truck buried in it. And she wrote and asked if that was a beach. She wasn't joking. She genuinely thought it might be sand. She'd never seen snow that wasn't in a movie, and the light was funny in the photo, and she thought maybe it was a very white beach in Canada. I laughed out loud in an empty house. First time in a while. Maravich. Everybody called her Ivy. 38, so 17 years younger than me, which, yeah, I know. I clocked that immediately, and I'd like to say it bothered me more than it did. She was a team lead at one of the call centers in IT Park in Cebu City. BPO, they call it there. Business Process Outsourcing. Her account was a North American telecom, which meant she worked graveyard, 10 at night till 7 in the morning her time, so her whole life ran upside down to everybody around her. And that's the thing that made it work, actually, because Cebu's 14 hours ahead of Alberta. Her break at 2 in the morning was my noon. Her clock out at 7 a.m. was my 5 in the afternoon the day before. We lined up almost perfectly by accident. So the routine got to be, I'd get up, put the coffee on, and she'd be on her 15 sitting in the fire stairs of her building with her lanyard still on. You could hear the door go and somebody else's conversation echoing up the concrete. Sometimes a girl named Chona would lean into the frame and say something in Bisaya, and they'd both laugh, and Ivy would tell me it wasn't about me, and it obviously was. That went on for 14 months. 14 months. Think about that. That's not a fling. That's a rotation and a half. I knew when her performance review was. I knew she hated the client's new script. I knew she took her coffee with 3 of those little sachet things, and I gave her grief about it. She knew my knees were shot, and she knew about Wayne and the binder, which I didn't tell her for about 5 months, and then told her all at once, badly, at 1 in the morning, my time with a Pilsner in my hand. She didn't say much when I told her that. She just let me get through it. Then she said something like, "So you don't trust anybody now?" And I said, "Pretty much." And she said, "Okay." Not heard about it. Just, okay. Noted. Here's the part 1 need you to hear properly, because this is the whole hinge of my story. She never asked me for money. Not once. Not in 14 months. Not load. Not a birthday. Not a typhoon. And there were typhoons. Her building lost power for 2 days in that first October, and she told me about it after it was fixed, in passing, as a joke about the elevators. I offered twice. First time was about month 7. She'd mentioned her mother's medicine, maintenance meds, blood pressure, something like 1,800 pesos a month, which is 40-something bucks Canadian. And I said, let me get that. Let me just cover that. And she got quiet. And then she said, no, thank you, Po. But no. She said, if you send money, then I will always wonder what we are. Something close to that. I've gone back and forth about whether that was rehearsed, and I'll tell you my honest answer at the end of all this, but at the time, it went through me like a shot of rye. Because that's the opposite, isn't it? That's the exact opposite of the thing you're warned about. I'd spent 7 months looking for the tap turn, and here's a woman turning the tap off herself. Second time I offered was Christmas. Same answer, shorter. Third time was February, about a year in, and she cried. Not big crying. She was in the fire stairs, she'd had a bad shift, and she put her hand over the camera, which is a thing she did, and I could hear it. And she said, sorry. She said she was just tired. And then she said something about how everyone who talks to her wants to give her money, and she just wanted one person who didn't. I'm going to say something now that took me 2 years to be able to say. That worked on me better than any request ever could have. Better than a hospital bill, better than a sob story, better than anything. And I don't know, I still don't know, whether she meant it to. Both things can be sitting there in the same person at the same time. I've come around to thinking they usually are. But that was the night I stopped testing her. Just quit. Put the wrench down. Meanwhile, I'm doing my own arithmetic in Alberta. 26 grand in the account. Pension coming in around 2,000 a month Canadian once it all lined up. And rent alone in Red Deer eating better than half of that. Whereas the videos are all telling me a man can live decent in Cebu on 1,100, 1,200. I made an actual spreadsheet. Rig guys love a spreadsheet. Booked the flight in month 14. Calgary to Vancouver, to Manila, to Mactan. $1,600 return, which I felt in my chest. The door opened at Mactan, and it was like walking into a warm, wet towel. 9 at night, and still 30 degrees. Diesel and something sweet burning. Took an hour and change to get into the city over the bridge, with the traffic and the tricycles coming at you sideways, and the driver playing a Filipino cover of a Bee Gees song, and I sat in the back with my knees up around my ears thinking, well, here we are. She was at the barrier in a yellow shirt, with the lanyard still on. Came straight off shift. And she was her. That's the only way I can put it. Same face, same laugh, same everything. No swap, no cousin, no surprise. 14 months. And the woman in the airport was the woman on the phone. I spent the next 2 weeks taking that as proof of every other thing I wanted to believe. 2 weeks turned into 2 months. And the way that happened was, I walked into the Bureau of Immigration office on Burgos Street with a folder and walked out with another 29 days. That's a thing people don't tell you about this country. The tourist visa's 30 days on arrival, but you can just keep extending it. 2 months, then another 2, on and on, up to about 3 years before they make you leave and come back. It cost me something like $3,500 a pop back then, call it $85 Canadian, and it takes an afternoon and a lot of sitting on a plastic chair under a ceiling fan that isn't doing anything. I sat in that chair the first time and thought, well, I've got nowhere to be. 54 years old, and I had nowhere to be. That's either freedom or it's the other thing, and some days I still can't tell which. So we became official somewhere in there. I don't have a date for it. There was no conversation where anybody said, right, we're doing this. It was more that I stopped booking a return flight. And here's what I need you to understand about why I felt safe. Because if you're watching this, thinking you'd have spotted it, fair enough. Maybe you would. But put yourself where I was. She had a job. A real one, with a badge and a schedule, and a manager she complained about. She made something like $38,000 a month, which is around 900 Canadian, and for a team lead in Cebu, that's decent. That's not rich, but that's a woman who eats without me. She paid for things. That's the one that got me. First week she took me to a place on Escario for lechon, and she paid. And when I reached for it, she gave me a look like I'd insulted her mother. She paid for the grab. She bought me a phone case at SM City because mine was cracked, and she thought it looked cheap. And she never once brought up money. Not the whole visit. I kept waiting for it. I had actually braced for it. I'd read enough. I'd watched enough of these videos. I knew the shape of the thing. Week 3, week 4, the hospital call. It never came. So my brain did what brains do. It went, this one's different. Not because I'd proven anything, because I was tired of being suspicious, and here was a decent excuse to quit. June, we went to Toledo. That's her hometown, over on the west side of Cebu Island. 3 hours by bus from the South Bus Terminal, or 2.5 if the driver's got a death wish, which he did. Series bus, aircon barely working, curtains stuck shut, some Bisaya action movie playing on a screen up front at full volume. You go up over the mountains through Balamban, and then down the other side, and the sea just opens up in front of you. I liked it. I want to say that. The whole ride, I had my knees jammed into the seat in front of me, and I liked it. Green, like you can't imagine if you're from Alberta. We do sky. We don't do green like that. Their place is up off the highway a bit, past the basketball court, and there's always a basketball court, every barangay in this country. Doesn't matter if there's no clinic. There's a court. And down a concrete lane where the tricycles come at you 3 abreast. The house was her grandmother's. Concrete block, corrugated roof, 1 proper bedroom and then a partition, and a bit of covered space out front where the sari-sari store was. And I say, store. There was a wooden counter with the wire grill and a rack of shampoo sachets, a few packs of Marlboros, some Lucky Me noodles, a cooler with soft drinks in it, and about 9 bottles of Red Horse. That was it. That was the inventory. You could have bought the whole business for $200. 4 younger siblings, plus the mother, plus the grandmother, plus a niece who I never did work out whose kid she was. Rooster going at 4 in the morning right under the window. Karaoke from 3 houses over until 1 a.m. A woman doing my way and nobody stopping her. And I sat there on a plastic stool that first evening with a San Miguel going warm in my hand, and I did the arithmetic on my girlfriend that I should have done on the land. She'd been carrying that entire house since she was 20. 20. Her dad went to Saudi as a driver and stopped sending, and stopped calling, and that was that. So the eldest daughter picks it up, because that's how it works here. Half her salary, every payday, for 18 years. Half. She'd put 2 of her brothers through part of college, and 1 of them finished. She was godmother to 6 kids. 6. And every one of those is money at Christmas, and money at graduation, and money when somebody's sick. Because that's what a godparent is here. It's not a card and a hug. It's a lifelong invoice. They've got a word for it. Utang na loob. Debt of the inside, more or less. Gratitude you owe and keep owing. It's not a scam word. Everybody wants to make it a scam word. It isn't. It's the whole load-bearing structure of the place. Take it out, and the whole thing comes down. She'd been an OFW without leaving. That's what I finally understood. Millions of these people go to Dubai and Hong Kong and Riyadh to hold their families up from a distance. And Ivy just did it from a call center 9 hours from home, on nights, for 18 years. Nobody in that house said any of that to me. I put it together from about 40 small things. Sunday we went to Mass. Big church in the town center, the ceiling fans going, people standing out the doors because there's never enough room. I'm United Church by baptism, and functionally nothing by about age 15. So I stood when everybody stood and sat when everybody sat, and understood maybe a fifth of it. Afterwards the mother took my hands, she's about 5'0", and said a whole speech in Bisaya, and Ivy translated it, and it was thank you for coming so far, and God has a plan, and you are a blessing to us. And here's the thing that I want to be fair about. She meant it. That was not a play. That woman prayed for a lot of things over a lot of years, and one of them showed up in a bad shirt, with sunburnt arms, and to her that was mathematics resolving. It made me deeply uncomfortable, and I liked it far too much. Both, at the same time. I hadn't been anybody's answer to anything since the last rig I ran. That was the trip where I offered the monthly. Nobody asked. I'm going to keep saying that because it matters. Ivy didn't ask. The mother didn't ask. Nobody hinted. I brought it up on the bus back to the city with the mountains going past, and I said I'd like to send P $12,000 a month for the family. About $290 Canadian. She said no first. Of course she did. Took me till Balamban to talk her into it. And I sat there feeling like I'd done something. My truck payment on the F-250 was $640 a month back home. This was less than half a truck payment, and it was food for 7 people. $290 to matter again. Cheapest thing I ever bought. I flew back to Alberta in August to deal with my affairs, kill the lease, sell the truck, tell my sister, and I kept sending it from Red Deer. That was strange, actually. Sitting at a kitchen table at -9 in October, tapping money into a phone, and knowing exactly which counter it would land on. Knowing the smell of that room. I'd never done that before. Sent money somewhere I'd stood. I came back in September with 2 bags and no return ticket, which is a different kind of arriving. Sold the F-250 to a guy in Lacombe for $22,500, and that all went into the account. Killed the lease. Gave my sister a box of stuff I couldn't throw out. Photos, my dad's watch, a plaque they gave me when the Fox Creek job wrapped. She stood in her driveway, holding this box, and she said, "So when are you back?" And I said, "I don't know, Deb." And she said, "Okay," in a way that meant not okay. Found a place in Mabolo. 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, tiled everything. That particular Philippine apartment smell of concrete and floor wax and somebody else's cooking. P $18,000 a month, about $430 Canadian, which for Cebu City is fair. Aircon in the bedroom only. Water pressure that came and went with the mood of the building. I loved it. First month, I honestly loved it. I'd get up early, because the roosters don't care what you want, and I'd walk down to a bakery on the corner and get pandesal hot out, 4 pesos each, and stand there eating them out of the bag like a kid. Down the road, there was a carinderia run by a woman named Nene, who fed me adobo and rice for 60 pesos and shouted at me about the Alberta cold like it was a personal insult I'd invented. The P $12,000 kept going every month, only now I was handing it to Ivy in cash on the 1st, because she'd take it to Toledo herself. That felt better somehow. Stupid. But it did. Money in your hand feels like a gift. Money on a phone screen feels like a subscription. Then, in November, her mother got sick. Gallstones. It had been going on a while, apparently. That's another thing here. People just have things for years because getting them looked at costs money. She'd been taking painkillers from the mercury drug and hoping. Then it got bad enough that she couldn't stand up straight, and they brought her into Cebu City. Now, I want to describe what happened at that hospital properly, because this is the single most educational hour of my entire time in this country. We went private, Chonghua, because the public option. I'd walked past a public hospital ward once, and there were people on the floor. Not being dramatic. On the floor, in the corridor, with their families sat beside them. Ultrasound confirmed it. Surgery recommended. Fine. Good. Let's do it. And then a woman behind a glass window, with a little metal tray, told us the estimate and told us we could pay at the cashier. Up front, before. P $85,000, about $250 Canadian. I'm standing in this lobby with the aircon roaring and a TV in the corner playing a noontime variety show. And I'm from a country where I have literally never in 54 years seen a bill for medical anything. Not once. I've had a hernia repair and 2 scopes on my knee, and my total lifetime exposure to a hospital cashier was 0. And here's this woman with a laminated price list waiting on me while a queue builds up behind. I paid it. Debit card, and the machine failed twice, and I had to go outside to a BDO ATM and pull the Daily Max and come back and do it again the next morning. And I want to be very clear about this because people watching these videos love to hear the words fake emergency. It wasn't fake. I saw the ultrasound. I sat in the corridor for 4 hours during the surgery drinking a Coke out of a plastic bag with a straw in it, which is a thing they do here, and I never got used to. I saw her after, out cold with the drain in. She was in that bed 6 days. She's fine now. She still has the gallstones in a little jar because they let you keep them, which I find hilarious and slightly disturbing. That money did what it was supposed to do. That's not the problem. The problem is what it taught me about myself, which is that I could write off $2 grand in an afternoon and feel good about it. The next one was my idea. Nobody's else's. Mine. I need that on the record because it's the one that actually mattered. I'd been chewing on it since Toledo. I couldn't stand the arithmetic. 7 people, 1 salary and a half, and now me propping the whole thing up on the 1st of every month forever. On a rig, if you've got a pump that only works when you're standing on it, you don't stand on it for 20 years. You fix the pump. So over Christmas, I said, let's build the store out properly, and let's get Jomar a tricycle. Jomar's the brother, second oldest, 29 at the time. Decent kid. Bit soft, bit drifty, but decent. Habal drivers in that area can pull 600, 700 a day. If they're running, that's $15 Canadian, which sounds like nothing until you put it next to what the family had. Total came to $140,000, about $3,400, broke down as $95,000 for a used Honda with a sidecar rig, papers and registration, $45,000 for stock, and a proper set of shelves and a chest freezer so they could sell ice and frozen fish instead of just shampoo sachets. I called it seed capital. In my head, I actually used those words. I told myself this was my exit. Build them something that earns, and then the monthly can taper. I even made a spreadsheet. I told you, rig guys love a spreadsheet. That was the first money I sent that I could not get back. The hospital was gone the second I paid it, and I knew that. This one, I told myself, was an investment. You'd think a man who'd already been done once by that word would hear it coming out of his own mouth. By March, the tricycle was parked more than it was moving. Not out of laziness exactly. The chain went, then the tire, then there was a week where Jomar had dengue and nobody else could drive it. Then it just sort of settled into being a thing in the yard. Every so often there'd be a photo of him with it, and I'd think, good. The store did better, but not the way I meant. What happens is, your family's the customer. Kids take a soft drink, and auntie takes a bag of rice. Nobody's writing it down because who writes down family? So the inventory turns into groceries. That's not theft. Genuinely, that's not theft. That's a shop inside a household, and I hadn't thought about the difference for one single second before I put $4.5 grand into it. And around then, the small asks started arriving. Never from Ivy directly. Always through her. Her cousin's boy needed $8,000 for a school thing. A woman I'd met once at the fiesta needed help with medicine. Ivy would relay it with this flat voice, no push behind it. And every time she'd say, I told them no already. I'd say, send it anyway, half the time. Being asked felt good. That's the ugly part. 2 years of being a guy sitting in a rented bungalow watching his driveway drift over, and now people needed me. I was somebody's answer. There was a fella at a bar in Mango Square, about 60, Manchester or thereabouts, 3 sandmigs deep at 4 in the afternoon. Heard my accent, heard Toledo, and he leans over and says, "Whatever you do, don't build on the family land. Don't touch it. It's never her lot. It's never clean. Ask them for the title. Ask for the actual paper." And then he ruined it. Started in on how they're all the same. They're all working an angle. None of them love you. And this and that. And his eyes were doing that wet, swimmy thing. So I paid up and left. Because I'd made a decision somewhere in there. I would rather be a fool than be that guy. Those were the 2 options I gave myself. Nobody told me there was a third one where you check the paper and stay pleasant. The house wasn't her idea, and it wasn't mine. It came up the way most bad decisions do, which is that it looked like the answer to a different problem. February. I'm sitting in the Mabolo place doing the rent math for about the 10th time. $18,000 a month, $430, going out the door forever and never coming back. Over 10 years, that's 50 grand Canadian. Gone. To a landlord I met twice. And Ivy says, not pushing, she was on the couch with her feet up doing something on her phone. She says, "You know there's the lot in Toledo." That's it. That's the whole pitch. That's how it entered my life. I want you to notice that nobody asked me for anything. I need to keep saying that because it's the mechanism. Every single dollar in this story went out because I decided it should. That's not a defense of anybody. It's just how the thing actually worked. And if you're waiting for the part where she demands money, there isn't one. That's what makes it dangerous. We went out the next weekend and stood on it. Maybe 200 square meters of scrub behind and to the side of the grandmother's place, a couple of banana trees, somebody's tethered goat, a heap of coconut husks. You could see a strip of sea from the corner if you stood in the right spot and tilted your head, which I did, repeatedly, like an idiot. Her mother nearly came apart. Genuinely. She was walking it out with her arms, showing me where the kitchen would go, and Ivy's translating about half of it, and laughing. Here's the thing that finished me. It was going to be cheap. A modest provincial house, concrete block, 2 bedrooms, tin roof, tiled floors, decent CR. That's the bathroom, they call it a comfort room here, which I love. You can do that in a place like Toledo for $600,000, about $14,500 Canadian, 14.5 grand for a house. In Alberta, that's a used Ram with high mileage, and I had roughly 16.5 left. Yeah, I know. I'm sitting here saying it out loud and I can hear it. But at the time, the arithmetic went the other way in my head. Rent gone forever, permanently, at 55, on a pension of about 2,000 Canadian a month. My whole plan for the rest of my life was rent I could never stop paying. This killed it. That's what I saw. We staged it, because that's what you do. Tranche 1, February. $120,000, call it $2,900, for clearing. The foundation, the slab, hollow blocks, sand, gravel, rebar. Photos came through within about a week, and there was actual concrete on the ground. I've never in my life been so happy about a slab. Tranche 2, May, P110,000, about $2,650. Blockwork, posts, lintels. By then, there were walls at chest height, and you could stand inside rooms. Tranche 3, September, P80,000, roughly $1,930. Roofing, trusses, and the corrugated sheets and the ridge cap, that's $310,000, about $7,500 Canadian out of what I had left. The groundbreaking was in March, and honestly, that day was the best day I've had in about 10 years, And I'm not going to pretend otherwise, just because of what came after. They got the parish priest out. He came in the afternoon, did the blessing, sprinkled holy water on the corner posts, and on me, said a prayer with about 30 people standing round in the heat. And that's the Philippines. You don't pour a slab, you have it blessed. Every jeepney's got a rosary on the mirror. Every new sari-sari store gets prayed over. They killed a pig. There was lechon and pancit, and about 4 kinds of thing in a bowl one never did identify, and San Miguel in a styrofoam cooler, and the whole thing cost me another $15,000, which I didn't even count at the time. Somebody had a karaoke machine going by 5 in the afternoon. A kid put a hard hat on me that had come from nowhere, and everybody took photos. And I put those photos on Facebook. That's the part 1,000 most embarrassed about, if I'm honest. Not the money. The photos. Me in a hard hat next to a concrete slab in the Philippines, with a beer and 30 people around me, and my cousins in Alberta liking it, and my sister commenting, "Looks amazing, Garth," and me sitting there at 11 at night refreshing it. 2 years earlier, I was a guy in a rented bungalow who couldn't pick out a snow shovel. Now, I was a man with a project. That's what I bought. Not a house. That. Then it started going slow. Not dramatically. That's what I need you to understand. There was never a moment where anything went obviously wrong. It just got sticky. Prices went up between tranches. Cement was up, they said. Hauling was up. The rebar cost more than quoted. Which is all true, by the way. That's real. Cement did go up. I couldn't verify a single number, and I didn't try. Because, how do you? You're standing in a lot in Toledo. You don't know what a bag of Republic cement costs. You know what a wireline unit costs? Not the same skill. Ivy's cousin Bebot became the contractor somewhere around Tranche 2, and I never actually agreed to that. He just was, one day. Nice enough guy. Did some work in Bohol, apparently. Work stopped for 3 weeks in June. Then a fortnight in July. Rain, a funeral, somebody's brother-in-law had the truck. And there was no permit posted. I'd worked construction adjacent my whole life. You post the permit on the site, that's just what you do. Everywhere on earth I'd ever been. I asked about it and got told the barangay is handling it. Ang barangay bahala. Don't worry. I let that go. Then, in August, a neighbor came round. Older fella, maybe 70. Thin, straw hat. Walked up while I was standing there in the mud and started talking to Ivy's mother in Bisaya. And it went on. 10 minutes, 15. Not shouting. Nobody was shouting. But there's a way people talk when it's not friendly, and you don't need the language for it, and both his hands kept going out towards the lot. I said, "What's he saying?" And Ivy said, "Boundary. He thinks the corner is over." He came back 4 days later and did it again. And the mother, who I'd never once seen anything but delighted with me, wouldn't look at me for the rest of that afternoon. Sat inside, sent food out with the niece. That's when I asked about the title. One time, standing in the yard, evening, with the sun going down over the water and a tricycle grinding past on the lane, I said, "Who's actually got the papers on this lot?" And Ivy said, "Her Lola has them. The grandmother. They're in the house, in the aparador." And I said, "Okay, that's it. That's the entire investigation. 2 sentences and a beer." Because here's what I knew right then, and I knew it. I want to be honest about this. I knew that the next question was, can I see them? And I knew what asking that would mean. It would mean I was checking. On her mother, who'd just been prayed over in front of 30 people with my name in the prayer. in a country where you don't put a thing like that in somebody's face, where nobody says the hard sentence out loud if there's any way round it. I'd have been the Kano who asks for paperwork from a family who fed him. So I didn't ask. I chose that. Nobody stopped me. I stood in that yard and decided I'd rather not know than be that. That's the whole story right there, if you want it in one sentence. Everything after is just the invoice. New Year came around, and I sat down with the spreadsheet properly for the first time in a while. Flights, visa extensions, the hospital, the tricycle, the store, 10 months of the monthly, my rent, about $9,500 Canadian gone out of 26. I remember thinking, that's fine. I've got 16 and a half and a pension. And I closed the laptop. The fiesta was the 3rd week of January. Every barangay in this country has one. Patron saint, a date on the calendar, and everybody who ever left comes home for it. There's a mass, there's a procession, there's a basketball tournament, and there's a table outside every house with food on it, and you are expected to eat at all of them. Not some. All. I'd been out there 4 days before it started, helping in the way a big useless foreigner helps, which is by carrying things and being in the way. And behind all of it, up the slope, was my house. Roof on, walls up, windows just holes, doorways just gaps, rebar still sticking out of the tops of the columns because they always leave it in case somebody adds a 2nd floor in 10 years. Concrete floor with nothing on it, and a light bulb on a wire that Bebot had run off the grandmother's meter. You could stand inside it. That's the thing. It was a building you could stand inside of. And I'd made it. And I was proud of it in a way I hadn't been proud of anything since about 2011. On the day itself, they sat me at the head of the table under a tarp with the barangay captain and the mother and 2 of the aunties. Guest of honor. Nobody says that out loud, they just put you there. Lechon on a board, the whole pig, the skin crackin' when the guy went at it. Pancit in a basin. Rice in a rice cooker the size of a drum. Somebody put a garland of these paper flowers on me at one point, and I'll be straight with you. I acted embarrassed, and I loved every second of it. 55 sunburnt neck, sitting at the top of the table in a town where 3 years earlier I couldn't have pointed to on a map, and the whole street knew my name. The karaoke started around 4 in the afternoon. By 10, it was still going. Somebody's brother-in-law doing air supply badly with total commitment. Jomar sat down beside me around 11. He had a bottle of Tandway and a cup, and I could tell straight off he was well past his depth with it. He'd been on it since the afternoon. He starts talking about the tricycle, how the bearings went, how his mother makes him take her to church in it and won't pay for gas, and how everybody thinks he's lazy, but nobody thinks Ivy's lazy even though Ivy left. All that. 29 years old with a chip about his sister that he'd clearly been carrying around a long time. And then, somewhere in the middle of that, still talking about his sister, he waved his cup up at the house and said something like, "She should have told you about the lot. Manong Doring's lot. She should have told you." I said what? And he explained it to me like I already knew. That's the part one keep coming back to. He wasn't confessing. He thought he was commiserating. The lot was mortgaged. Sanla, he called it. I've since learned it's a whole informal system. You pledge land to a neighbor for cash, and he uses it, or you pay him back. Their father did it, years back, before Saudi, when things were bad. Manong Doring, the old fella in the straw hat, the one who'd come round twice, had put money on that land and never been paid out. And every year he'd come round and say something, and every year the mother said soon. And then the second thing, which Jomar didn't even flag as important. The titles in the Lola's name, the grandmother's. And the grandmother's got, I counted them out on my fingers on the table with him, 9 living children in Cebu and Bohol and Mindanao, and it's never been divided, never been settled. No extrajudicial settlement, no partition, nothing. All 9 of them own a share of the whole thing. One of them's in Davao, and nobody's spoken to him since a funeral. I sat there with the karaoke going and the paper flowers still round my neck. Because here's the thing I want you to understand about me. I'm not a clever man, but if you put a diagram in front of me, a system with pressure in it, and where it's going and what's holding what, I can read that in about 4 seconds. That's the one thing I've got. And Jomar just handed me the diagram. A lot pledged to a creditor who's still owed. A title split 9 ways with nobody's signature on anything. A house on top of it that I paid for. And the third fact, which I already knew, which I had known the entire time, which is on every single one of those YouTube videos I watched in a cold bungalow in Alberta. A foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines? Cannot? Not through marriage, not through a girlfriend, not through anything except a corporate structure a man like me has no business trying. I knew that. I'd have told you that if you'd asked me. I just never once put it in the same room as my own money. The house wasn't going to be mine. It was never going to be mine. And it wasn't even cleanly theirs. It was sitting on a lot that a 70-year-old man in a straw hat had a real claim on, and that 8 other people had a share of. I said thanks, Jomar. I remember saying that. Poor kid had no idea what he'd done. I didn't sleep that night. Went and sat in the house. My house, the empty concrete box with no windows, on an upturned pail, and I did the arithmetic I'd been going out of my way not to do for about a year. Monthly support, 16 months, 192,000, hospital, P 85,000, tricycle in the store, 140,000, the build, P 310,000, plus the Fiesta at groundbreaking, plus a septic tank I forgot to mention, plus the odd P 8,000 here and 10,000 there for the cousins. Flights, visa extensions, my own rent in Mabolo for 16 months. About 19,000 Canadian, out of 26. 7 left. I've been through some things. I've had a man die on a lease I was running. But sitting on a bucket at 4 in the morning with roosters starting up, and the last of the karaoke finally packing in, working out that I'd done it again. That was the worst hour of my life. And it was the same hour, that's the thing. It was the exact same hour I'd had in Alberta with the letter in my hand. Same shape. Different weather. We went back to Cebu 2 days later, and I asked her in the apartment in Mabolo on the Tuesday night. I didn't shout. I want to say that. There was no scene. One've watched other men do the scene, and it doesn't get you anything. I just said, tell me about Manang Doring and the lot. And she didn't deny it. Not one word of it. That's the thing that took the ground out from under me. I'd braced for a fight, and there wasn't one. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she went through it all. And half of it she'd known since she was a teenager, and had just never thought of as a fact, the way you don't think of your own address as a fact. She said her mother told her Manong Doring was patient, said the money would get paid when the store came good, said once we were married the papers could get fixed, the Lola would sign, they'd sort the shares. And I want to be fair. That's not nothing. People do sort that stuff out here. It just takes years and lawyers and everyone's signature and money nobody has. And then she said the sentence. She said, I thought it would be okay. And she cried. And I sat there in a plastic chair 3 feet away from her, and I could not tell you, then or now, what that crying was. Whether it was for me, or for her, or for the house, or because someone had finally said the thing out loud in a family where you don't say the thing out loud. Here's what landed on me while she was crying, and it's the only bit of this whole story I'd call wisdom. She wasn't lying to me. Not then, and I don't think ever. She'd been carrying a ledger since she was 20 that could not be balanced. 5 people, 1.5 salaries, a father in Saudi who stopped calling, a debt on the land nobody could clear, 6 godchildren, and 18 years of half her pay going west across the island every 15th and 30th. Nobody in her life had ever made those numbers move. Not one person. And then a big slow Canadian showed up and the numbers moved. Of course, she didn't ask about the title. Asking would have stopped the only thing that had ever worked. The lie was arithmetic. It wasn't love. Both of those things are true at once, and I've had 2 years to get comfortable with it, and I'm still not. I stopped the build the next morning, called Bebot, told him no more. And there was nobody to go to. No lawyer worth the fee, because what am I suing for? I gave that money away, freely, to people who never once asked. No police, because no crime. Nothing to sign, nothing to file, nobody in handcuffs. Same as Wayne, exactly the same as Wayne. Except this time, the guy who signed the papers without reading them was sitting on a bucket in Toledo, and I couldn't back out of his driveway. I stayed in the Mabelo apartment about 3 weeks doing not much. I want to be accurate about that, because rock bottom in these stories always sounds cinematic, and mine wasn't. I got up. I ate at Nine's. I watched a lot of Australian mining documentaries on YouTube for reasons I can't explain. The aircon dripped onto the tile in the corner, and I never fixed it. And there's a stain there now that's somebody else's problem. The hardest thing I did that month was phone my sister. 10 in the morning her time, snow in the background of the video. Deb standing in her kitchen in Red Deer. And I had to tell her that the house in the photos, the one she commented on, looks amazing, Garth, was not mine and never had been. And that I'd put the better part of 19 grand into a lot with 9 owners and a lien on it. She didn't say, "I told you so." She never said it about Wayne either. What she said was, "Are you eating?" Which was worse, honestly. And then she said, "Do you need to come home?" And I said no, and she said okay. And there was about 4 seconds of nothing. I'm 55 years old, and I still cannot handle being somebody's worry. Here's the part that took me months to properly understand, though. The last tranche was ready to go. P90,000, call it 2,275, for finishing. Windows, doors, the CR fixtures, tiling the floor, a bit of render. Bebot had given me the list. I had it on my phone. I'd told Ivy I'd send it after the fiesta, when I got back to the city and could get to the bank. That's 4 days, maybe 5. If Jomar hadn't got into the Tandway that night, if his sister hadn't been on his mind for whatever 29-year-old reasons, if he'd sat at the other end of the table. I send that money. And then I'm living in a finished house. And a finished house is much, much harder to walk away from than a concrete box with holes in it. That's the thing. Once you're sleeping in it, once your stuff's in it, you're not leaving. You're just paying whatever comes next forever, because what else are you going to do? A drunk kid with a chip on his shoulder saved me about $20,000 over the following 10 years. He doesn't know that. I've never told him. We're still friendly, actually. He's driving for a Grab operator in Cebu City now. So let's do the accounting properly, because that's the useful bit. Out the door over roughly 2 years, about 19,000 Canadian. Monthly support, the hospital, the tricycle and the store, the build, the fiestas, the flights, the visa extensions, my own rent. Left, about 7,000, and the pension. And I want to be very clear about the pension, Because it's the whole reason you're watching a story about a close call instead of a story about a man sleeping rough at the North Bus Terminal. OAS and CPP, roughly 2,000 Canadian a month, and it lands in a Canadian account every single month, whether I'm clever or stupid. I never touched it, never borrowed against it, never opened a joint account with anybody, never put my name on a loan, never guaranteed anybody's loan, never did the SRRV, which would have meant parking 10 grand US on deposit, and thank God I didn't have it to park. That wasn't wisdom. Let's be honest. That was that I was too broke to reach it. But it held. And it's holding now. I moved to Dumaguete in the spring. Negros Oriental, ferry across from Cebu, university town, about 200,000 people, and a seafront boulevard where old men walk in the evening. It's cheaper. It's quieter. My place is a small one-bedroom off the boulevard, P9,000 a month, about 215, and the landlady grows calamansi in tires out front and gives me some when she's got extra. I've got a budget written out on a piece of lined paper taped inside the cupboard door above the sink. Actual pen and paper. Rent, food, load, water, $150 a month for the eye doctor because my eyes are going. It comes to about 1,100 Canadian, and I live inside it. There's a table at one of the bars on the boulevard where the same 6 or 7 foreigners sit every afternoon from about 3. I know what's said at that table. I heard it in Mango Square 3 years ago from a man with wet eyes. They're all the same. None of them love you. This country's a shakedown. I go for a San Mig now and again, but I don't sit down there. Because if I sit down at that table, then the last 3 years turned me into that. And I'd genuinely rather have been a fool. A fool is a thing that happened to you. That table is a thing you decide to be every afternoon at 3. Ivy and I still talk. I know how that sounds. It's not clean, and I'm not going to make it clean for you. She's still at the BPO. She got promoted, actually. Ops supervisor now, better money. She messages maybe once a fortnight. Sends me things she thinks are funny. Asked me last month if my knee was better. I've seen her twice since. Once when she came over on the ferry. Once at SM Seaside when I was in Cebu for a dental thing. We had halo and talked for 2 hours about nothing. There's no money between us anymore, in either direction. And there won't be. That's understood without anybody having said it, which is very Filipino of us both. Whatever we were is finished. We couldn't get past it, and I don't think you could. The house is still standing. Roof on, no windows. Her mother lives beside it, and the family stores rice sacks in it, and one of the aunties has a chicken situation going on in the back room. Manang Doring hasn't been paid. He probably never will be. I don't hate anybody in this story. That's the thing I've had the hardest time explaining to Canadians. There's no villain in it. Ivy loved me, and she also needed me, and she also let me build a house on ground she knew was rotten. And all 3 of those are true at the same time. And if you can't hold 3 things at once, this country will take you apart. So, what do I actually know now? On a rig, everything warns you. Pressure builds before it blows. Mud comes back heavy. There's a noise, a smell, a gauge doing something it shouldn't. And if you've been out there 26 years, you feel it before you see it. That's how I lived my whole working life. Wait for the signal. React to the signal. People aren't rigs. There's no gauge. Nothing hums before it goes. The nice people and the ones who'll cost you everything behave identically right up until the day they don't. And you will not feel it coming. And I've now proved that twice, on 2 continents, in a language I understood perfectly both times. So stop waiting for the signal. That's it. That's what I've got. Go and look at the paper instead. Ask for the title. Ask for the tax deck. Get your own lawyer. Your own, not her cousin who did some work in Bohol, and pay him the 8,000 pesos and make him read it. And when they say the Lola has the papers, say, "Lovely, let's go and have a look at them." Yes, it's awkward. Yes, you'll feel like the suspicious Kano. Do it anyway. Ask early, when it's cheap, because asking on day 1 costs you an uncomfortable afternoon, and asking on day 900 costs you $19,000. And the short version, the one I'd put on a sticker. If your name can't go on the paper, your money doesn't go in the ground. That's a rule that has no exceptions, doesn't care whether she loves you, and doesn't require you to be a clever man. Which is handy, because I'm not one. Garth is 57 now. He still lives in Dumaguete, still inside that budget on the cupboard door, and he's never asked us to take his side. And notice what he didn't lose. He didn't lose his pension, because he never touched it, never pledged it, never put it in anyone else's name. That single fact is the difference between the story you just heard and the ones we get sent every week that end much worse. Foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines. That's not a loophole to root around. It's the wall. And building on family land is one of the most common ways money vanishes here without anybody ever committing a crime. There's no one to charge. There's often no one who even lied. There's just a title nobody checked and a family carrying a debt they were too ashamed to say out loud. Stories like Garth's are why we put a guide together. The patterns, the questions to ask, the things these men wish somebody had told them before the first payment went out. It's in the description if it's something you need. If you're building something out here, or thinking about it, go and look at the paper. That's all. It costs you one awkward afternoon. Thanks for spending this time with us. Take care of yourselves out there. That's Inside the Philippines.